The year was 47 BCE. The Mediterranean sun beat down mercilessly upon Alexandria as Ptolemy XIII paced anxiously within the royal palace. His sister and co-ruler, Cleopatra VII, had been exiled from the capital months before, but rumors of her return with foreign assistance troubled the young pharaoh deeply. His advisors assured him that his position was secure, yet doubt gnawed at his confidence. "Your Majesty," announced Theophilus Eventide, the court steward, "the Roman general Julius Caesar requests an audience." Caesar had arrived in Alexandria pursuing his rival Pompey, only to be presented with Pompey's severed head, a miscalculated gift from Ptolemy that disgusted rather than pleased the Roman. Now Caesar was inserting himself into Egypt's royal succession dispute. The Roman must wait, Ptolemy declared, his voice cracking slightly, betraying his 17 years of age. "I am not prepared to." Before he could finish, the world around him shimmered and dissolved. When Ptolemy's vision cleared, he found himself seated at a polished wooden table in a strange, brightly lit chamber. The walls were impossibly smooth, and light emanated from glass panels in the ceiling without any visible flame. Around him sat other equally confused figures dressed in various historical garments. To his left sat a broad-shouldered man with a laurel wreath and purple-bordered toga, unmistakably the same Julius Caesar who had been waiting for his audience. Beside Caesar sat a stern-faced man in elaborate Persian royal attire who could only be Darius III, the last Achaemenid king who had faced Alexander the Great at Gaugamela in 331 BCE. Across the table, a woman in imperial Chinese silk robes observed the room with calculating eyes. Zetian, who had declared herself Emperor of China in 690 CE, the only woman to officially rule China in her own name. Next to her sat a muscular figure in Macedonian battle dress, Alexander the Great himself, who had died in 323 BCE after conquering an empire stretching from Greece to India. At the head of the table stood a woman in strange, form-fitting attire unlike anything Ptolemy had ever seen. "Welcome to the 21st Century Leadership Initiative," she announced. "I am Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, and you have all been temporarily transported to our time for an intensive leadership training program. Our goal is to analyze your leadership approaches and help you understand modern governance principles that might have altered your historical outcomes." "Sorcery!" exclaimed Darius, rising to his feet. "What Persian magic is this?" "Not magic, Your Majesty," Dr. Thornton replied calmly. "Technology. Something your civilizations conceptualized but could not fully realize." Caesar, ever the pragmatist, leaned forward. "I am scheduled to suppress a rebellion in Alexandria. I do not have time for whatever this is." "Time passes differently here," Dr. Thornton explained. "When you return, not a moment will have elapsed. Now, please direct your attention to the screen." The wall illuminated with moving images, something like reflections but impossibly detailed and colorful. The rulers watched in astonishment as scenes of modern democratic elections played out before them. "What we are observing is a peaceful transfer of power," Dr. Thornton explained. "In many modern nations, rulers are chosen by the citizens and serve limited terms. The common people choose their leaders? Preposterous!" Ptolemy scoffed. "Divine blood determines who rules. My family, the Ptolemaic dynasty, has ruled Egypt since 305 BCE when Ptolemy I, a general of Alexander, declared himself pharaoh." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Your ancestor was my father's general? Interesting. And how has your divine rule served Egypt?" Ptolemy shifted uncomfortably. "We have maintained stability. Yet your sister challenges your rule," Caesar noted with amusement. "And you seek my intervention." Dr. Thornton pressed a button, changing the images to graphs and statistics. "This represents the economic output and prosperity levels of modern democracies versus historical autocracies. Notice the dramatic difference in wealth distribution." The ancient rulers studied the figures with varying degrees of comprehension. "The Senate already limits my authority," Caesar mused. "Though perhaps not enough to create such prosperity." "You plan to be dictator for life," Alexander pointed out. "I heard you discussing it before this transportation occurred." Caesar did not deny it. His political maneuvering in Rome was already pushing the Republic toward imperial rule, though he would not live to see it, assassinated on the Ides of March, 44 BCE, less than 3 years in his future. Dr. Thornton continued the presentation, shifting to military affairs. Modern armies operate on principles of professionalism, technological advantage, and ethical engagement, rather than personal loyalty to a commander. Alexander leaned forward, intensely interested. My companion cavalry and the Macedonian phalanx revolutionized warfare. Are you suggesting these have been surpassed? Comprehensively, Dr. Thornton confirmed. Though your tactical innovations at Gaugamela in 331 BCE, using cavalry to create and exploit gaps in enemy formations, remain studied by military academies today. The screen displayed modern military units with advanced weaponry, communications equipment, and battlefield coordination. Darius, who had lost his empire to Alexander's superior tactics, watched with particular attention. With such forces, I might have prevailed at Issus and Gaugamela. Perhaps, Dr. Thornton acknowledged. But technology alone does not determine victory. Your centralized command structure was inflexible. Alexander's delegation of authority to competent generals allowed for greater battlefield adaptation. Zetian spoke for the first time, her voice measured and authoritative. In my reign from 690 to 705 CE, I recognized this principle. I implemented the imperial examination system to ensure merit, not birth, determined who served in government. An enlightened policy, Dr. Thornton agreed. Your meritocratic civil service examinations lasted until 1905 CE and influenced governance systems worldwide. However, your use of secret police and informants to eliminate rivals created a culture of fear that undermined long-term stability. Zetian's expression remained impassive, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the armrest of her chair. The training moved to a session on communication and transparency. Dr. Thornton's assistant, Thomas Ellington, distributed strange thin rectangular objects to each ruler. These are tablets, information devices, he explained. Today's leaders communicate directly with millions of citizens simultaneously. Impossible, Caesar declared, examining the tablet cautiously. Even with the fastest messengers, it would take months to reach so many. The screen lit up with examples of modern press conferences, social media, and public relations campaigns. Modern leaders are expected to explain their decisions, admit mistakes, and maintain public trust, Dr. Thornton explained. Transparency is considered essential to legitimate governance. Ptolemy looked horrified. You expect rulers to admit error? To justify their divine will to commoners? The concept of divine right has largely been abandoned, Mr. Ellington noted. Leadership is now understood as a public service, not a birthright. Absurd, Ptolemy muttered, though he seemed less certain than before. The day progressed with sessions on economic management, international diplomacy, crisis response, and environmental stewardship, all concepts foreign to the ancient rulers' experiences. During a discussion of economic systems, Caesar showed particular aptitude, quickly grasping concepts of monetary policy that had only existed in rudimentary form during his lifetime. Your calendar reform of 46 BCE was remarkably forward-thinking, Dr. Thornton noted. The Julian calendar you implemented remained the standard for 1,600 years until Pope Gregory XIII refined it in 1582. A practical necessity, Caesar responded, though he seemed pleased by the recognition. Proper governance requires accurate timekeeping. For the afternoon session, the rulers were divided into teams to work through simulated crisis scenarios. Alexander and Zetian proved a formidable pairing, their strategic minds complementing each other despite the 2 millennia separating their reigns. Darius, partnered with Ptolemy, struggled with the concept of negotiated settlement rather than absolute authority. A king does not compromise, he insisted when presented with a diplomatic scenario. Perhaps that is why your empire fell, Ptolemy observed quietly, earning a withering glare from the Persian monarch. When the groups reconvened, Dr. Thornton introduced a new topic: leadership succession represents one of history's greatest challenges. Few of you established systems that survived your deaths intact. The ancient rulers shifted uncomfortably. Alexander, you conquered an empire spanning 3 continents by age 30, yet when asked on your deathbed who should succeed you, you allegedly said the strongest, Dr. Thornton continued. The result was the Wars of the Diadochi, your generals fighting over your legacy, fragmenting everything you built. Alexander frowned. My son was not yet born. What choice did I have? Creating institutions that transcend individual leadership, Dr. Thornton suggested. Modern organizations survive changes in leadership because they operate on systems rather than personalities. Caesar nodded thoughtfully. Rome's strength has always been its institutions, the Senate, the courts, the administrative systems. Yet you are undermining those very institutions to consolidate your power, Dr. Thornton noted. The republic you claim to serve will not survive your ambition. Caesar's expression darkened, but he did not dispute the assessment. The final session of the day addressed a concept entirely alien to the ancient rulers, the emotional intelligence of leadership. Research demonstrates that effective leaders understand and manage their own emotions while empathizing with others, Mr. Ellington explained. This builds trust, improves decision-making, and creates more resilient organizations. Empathy is weakness, Darius declared. A king must be feared, not understood. Machiavelli would agree with you, Dr. Thornton replied. In The Prince, written in 1513 CE, he argued it was better for a ruler to be feared than loved if one could not be both. However, modern research suggests fear-based leadership produces short-term compliance but long-term resistance. My secret police ensured compliance was not optional, Zetian remarked coldly. And how many assassination attempts did you survive? Dr. Thornton asked. The Chinese empress did not answer, her silence acknowledgement enough. As the day concluded, the ancient rulers gathered for a final assessment. Each was provided with an analysis of their historical leadership and its consequences. Ptolemy read his with growing discomfort. His dependence on Roman intervention would ultimately cost Egypt its independence. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled since 305 BCE, would end with his sister Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE, making Egypt a Roman province. This cannot be, he whispered. 3 centuries of Ptolemaic rule ended. Caesar's report detailed his assassination on March 15, 44 BCE, less than 3 years in his future, at the hands of senators who feared his ambition. Though he had paved the way for the Roman Empire, he would not live to see it, and his grand plans would remain largely unfulfilled. Betrayed by Brutus. Caesar murmured, genuinely shocked. My friend and protégé. Alexander reviewed the fragmentation of his empire after his premature death at age 32 in 323 BCE. His conquests, while impressive, had established no lasting administrative structure. His legacy would be cultural, the Hellenistic period, rather than a unified empire. All that effort, Alexander said quietly. All those battles. For nothing. Darius confronted his historical reputation as the king who lost the greatest empire of the ancient world to Alexander. Despite commanding vastly superior resources, his inflexible tactics and centralized command had proven fatal flaws at critical battles. Perhaps I should have adapted, he acknowledged reluctantly. Zetian studied her assessment with unreadable expression. While recognized as an effective administrator who expanded the empire and elevated the status of Buddhism, her legacy was complicated by the brutal methods she employed to gain and maintain power, including the alleged killing of her own daughter to frame the empress and executing numerous real and perceived threats. History is written by men, she observed coolly. Had I ruled with less firmness, I would not be remembered at all. Dr. Thornton gathered them for final reflections. What have you learned that might change your approach to leadership? A thoughtful silence fell over the group. Caesar spoke first. Perhaps I have been too dismissive of the Senate's concerns. Rome's strength comes from its balance of power, not centralized authority. I might have been wise to establish clearer succession plans, Alexander admitted. My generals were loyal to me, not to my vision for a unified world. Darius nodded. Adaptability in battle. Delegation of authority. These concepts might have preserved my empire. Institutions that transcend individuals, Zetian mused. My reforms were significant, but tied too closely to my person rather than established as lasting systems. Ptolemy looked defeated. I have learned that divine right means nothing without competent leadership. Perhaps my sister Cleopatra deserves the throne more than I. As the session concluded, Dr. Thornton addressed them one final time. Leadership is a privilege and a responsibility. History remembers not just conquests and monuments, but the lasting impact on human lives. When you return to your times, you will have an opportunity, however brief, to reshape your legacies. The chamber shimmered around them, and Ptolemy found himself back in his palace in Alexandria, 47 BCE. Julius Caesar still waited for his audience, exactly as before. The young pharaoh hesitated, the knowledge of his dynasty's impending fall heavy in his mind. Could he change that fate? Could any of them? In Rome, Caesar paused while dictating a letter, suddenly wary of the political machinations around him. Should he reach out to the Senate with compromises rather than impositions of will? On the edges of the Gedrosian Desert in 325 BCE, Alexander reconsidered his plan to push his exhausted army further into unknown territories. Perhaps consolidation rather than endless conquest would secure his legacy. In his war camp after the defeat at Issus in 333 BCE, Darius contemplated a different approach to the upcoming battle at Gaugamela, one that might delegate more authority to his commanders. In her palace in Chang'an in 700 CE, Zetian reflected on her secret police and their role in maintaining her power. Was there another way to ensure stability without creating so many enemies? None could know if their new insights would change the course of history. The forces they confronted, political inertia, cultural expectations, personal ambition, and human nature, remained formidable obstacles. Yet each had glimpsed a different path, a vision of leadership beyond personal glory and absolute authority. They had seen the consequences of their decisions ripple through centuries and understood, perhaps for the first time, that true legacy lies not in monuments or conquests, but in the systems and values that endure long after individual rulers return to dust. The leadership training had revealed uncomfortable truths, that their cherished certainties about divine right, absolute authority, and military might were not the foundations of lasting governance they had believed. Modern concepts of accountability, transparency, institutional strength, and emotional intelligence had challenged their fundamental understanding of power. And that, perhaps, was the most frightening revelation of all, that everything they thought they knew about leadership was incomplete at best, and catastrophically wrong at worst. They had ruled nations and commanded armies, yet in the face of centuries of human progress and understanding, their approaches now seemed as primitive as stone tools compared to modern technology. History would unfold largely as it had before: Caesar assassinated, Alexander's empire fragmented, Darius defeated, Zetian's legacy complicated, and Ptolemy overshadowed by his sister Cleopatra. Yet in each case, a moment of doubt, a consideration of alternative approaches, might have slightly altered their paths. The true lesson of their journey through time was that leadership is not a destination but an evolution, constantly adapting to new understandings, challenges, and possibilities. The principles that build lasting institutions and improve human lives transcend time, while the trappings of personal power fade with remarkable speed. In the end, perhaps the most valuable insight for any leader, ancient or modern, is the humility to recognize that history does not belong to individuals but to the countless lives they impact through their choices, and that the greatest legacy is not what one achieves for oneself, but what one makes possible for the future.